Here we go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Inclusive Communication and Gender Pronouns. Why do they matter? Presented by Exude Human Capital. Just a little bit about Exude before we get started. Exude Human Capital is not your typical consulting firm. Since our founding in 2006, we've been on the mission to transform organizations by connecting the dots between human resources, leadership development, and inclusion and belonging. We provide dynamic solutions in HR outsourcing, compensation strategies, strategic advisory, organizational and cultural assessments, DEIB advisory and training, coaching, and leadership development programs. I must say that I believe that we are one of, if not the best, consulting firms, because the people who engage with you as clients, we bring our experience, our perspectives, and we partner with you. So welcome this morning as we navigate this conversation. My name is Romaine Jones-Wise. I will be one of your co-hosts this morning. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a senior consultant with Exude. I've been with Exude now for about 3 years, and I am very excited to introduce my co-facilitator, who is one of my favorite people, Doug.
I'm Doug May, and I'm so happy to be here this morning to talk to you about pronouns, and the ones that I use are he, him, and his. I'm a senior client advisor with Exude, and I'm also a contract trainer as well with them. And I've been with Exude for about 2.5 years, I think, Romaine. So I'm not that far behind you. So I'm thrilled to be here this morning.
Anytime Doug and I can get together to collaborate on anything, it's always going to be a good time. So ready to go? Here we go.
Yeah, I am ready to go. So let's start. Why don't we start by looking at what we're going to talk about today and to review the agenda really quickly. So we have approximately an hour today. So we're going to try to leave time at the end for questions. So probably 10 to 15 minutes. You please drop questions though in the chat as we go along as well. So what we're going to look at today is to, first of all, understand the importance of inclusive communication. So why is that inclusive? Why is it important? Why do we need to do it in the workplace? The second piece, which I think a lot of people have questions around, we're going to define the pronouns and some key terminology that'll help you to understand how people want to be referred to. And then also, why did the use of pronouns create an inclusive workplace? And why is it important? So we're going to take a look at that. How to acknowledge mistakes, because I'm going to tell you right now that we're all going to make mistakes. It happens all the time. Even both Ro and I, who have taught this class several times, as well as other classes in the DEIB space, we find that we still make mistakes. So how do we do that? And how do we call a person in instead of calling them out for making a mistake? So we'll also look at some best practices, both from an organizational standpoint, but also for you as an individual. What can you do to start to really practice using the correct pronouns? And then finally, we'll give you some key takeaways about what you can do, what are some additional steps that you can take, as well as what are some options that you have to in the future to have some more training. So that's our agenda for today. What I'd like to go to next, though, is to help us understand why language matters. So if you really think about it, this is why language matters. And so whenever we're talking about DEIB, it's about making people feel that they belong and they're part of the culture. So when we do not use inclusive language, it typically what it does is it contributes to the use of stereotyping. So you've all heard about stereotyping and how about its predetermined ideas about certain groups of people. So when we don't use that inclusive language, some people get left out. The second piece is that it harms the people who witness it as well as intended targets. I know you've probably all been in situations where somebody said something inappropriate, whether it has to do with race or gender or pronouns, and where it really hurts the team environment, not only for the person that it's happening to, but also the people who work with that person. It leads to toleration of hostile feelings and discrimination. So it can create a real energy, a bad energy in your organization that you don't want to feel. And then it finally, because of all those things, where the person feels that they don't belong and they feel that they're in a safe environment, it impedes the productivity and advancement of impacted groups at work. So the whole thing is that we want to make sure we're inclusive and we make people feel welcome. So let's look at what inclusive communication is. And this is how we define it at Exude. And it's inclusive communication intentionally chooses words and conveys messages that increase a sense of belonging and safety to be one's best and true self. Ultimately, in the workplace, if we want people to feel that they can be their best selves and to also contribute to the culture and to the success of the organization, we need to be inclusive in our communication. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we'll give you examples as we go through today. But let's start by looking at some of the times what are the benefits? And so both Ro and I are going to talk a little bit about what are the benefits of inclusive communication in the workplace. So go ahead, Ro. Why don't you take the first one and then we'll talk about it.
I think at the top of the overarching theme, it's respectfulness, it's relevance, it's creating a space for everybody to be seen. Inclusive communication, writing, actions, gesture, tone of voice, facial expressions, all of that creates a sense of respect, and it's relevant to everyone's experience. And then when we look at inclusive communication, we are literally looking at a person-centric approach. How can we support our whole employee in the workplace? Those two, to me, are just kind of seeing people for the individuals they are, and then creating a respectful environment.
Yeah, and if you, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Ro, I just jumped in. I wanted to also, if you think about it, and we're going to take a look at this a little bit later about how it's person-centered. And I think that's a critical thing that Ro brought up right now. And it's really about getting to know that individual. Because I think sometimes if we look at DEIB in the workplace and using the correct pronouns and being inclusive, we almost try to put people into, okay, this is how all people want to be treated. Well, this is how this whole group wants to be treated. Instead of looking at the person, because we're all made up of different characteristics. So it's really about how do we look at that specific person and make sure that they're comfortable.
The other things that, inviting people to contribute in creating psychological safety is definitely going to be key. Because when psychological safety is present in the workplace, people are free to be their true authentic selves. They're free to learn, they're free to challenge, they're free to contribute. And that really gives a sense of connection, community, and involvement. And we want to make sure that we are leveraging all of the amazing talent on our teams, but that only happens when people really have a true connection, feel included, and have a sense of belonging in the workplace. And then inclusive language, when we're very intentional, and that is my favorite word of today, intentionally working towards inclusive language, is going to help minimize the microaggressions, the things that we're saying in our everyday language that we don't even realize may be offensive to someone, may cause an impact that may not be intended, but is really creating an environment where people don't feel secure and feel safe. So definitely benefits of inclusive communication. Doug, anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, well, and I'm thinking about, in talking about microaggressions, they can be really blatant, or they can be sort of covert. I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, Romaine? It's under the radar a little bit, I guess. And so it's really about when we make up our minds about certain individuals, like for instance, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes when we look at pronouns, is that we think people are too sensitive, or, I was just kidding, those kind of things. So it's really about, those can be considered microaggressions. True. And those can come from stereotypes and biases. So a lot of times what we need to look at when we're inclusive, we're looking at inclusive communication is, where does our stuff come from too? So so think about it. So let me give you, so for example, with me, I am a white male. I'm gay. I grew up in the Midwest. I'm of a certain age. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but it's upper there. And so there's a lot of things that have happened in my life that may create a stereotype or a bias that I have, and that will affect the communication I have with certain people. So, for instance, we hear okay boomer or those millennials, all of those kind of things that we talk about. It's really about that's where a lot of those stereotypes and biases and potential microaggressions come from.
Indeed. Indeed. So we're going to also give you some tips on how to kind of have some self-reflection and tap into your self-awareness about our own individual experiences and how they transfer into how we communicate. So why is today's topic so important? Why do pronouns matter? Again, going back to one of my favorite words of the day, respecting people's gender identities, includes properly using their pronouns and their names, because everyone has the right for their self-defined experiences to be recognized and respected. And I encourage you all to really reflect on that. What a person defines for themselves as their choice of name, pronouns, they have the right to have that recognized and respected by others wherever they go, the workplace, out in public, any place, whatever that person decides for themselves, that's what they have the right to be called. That's what they want. So this type of conversation today will help create more inclusive environments, by teaching us to understand gender identity discrimination, what happens in the workplace, understanding the difference in gender diversity and expression, and how to really be intentional about practicing respect for all individuals. I've had this conversation with some other people. What I always said is respect does not always need to mean agreement. We don't have to necessarily agree with someone's choice or how they decide to define themselves. That has no direct impact on us. What we can do is offer respect and allow that person to beam in being their true authentic self. When we look at gender pronouns, using appropriate names, it is really going to help prevent a hostile and uncomfortable work condition, because now we're moving past what our own individual experiences are and offering the respect that should be given to everyone in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. And if I could just add, if you think about a person's journey, and where they have maybe had some difficulties in their lives, and they've really come to the place where they feel comfortable with who they are and have defined themselves in whatever pronouns they will use to describe who they are. And so it's really about making them feel comfortable and acknowledging their journey. Because isn't that really what we all do? I mean, people all come from different spaces and they've had different experiences. And it's really critical that we respect, as Rose said, and understand their journey. Yeah. You don't know what it took for that person to get to this point where they say it's okay for you to use the they and them pronoun. So it could have been a long journey.
Could have been a long journey. I just noticed something in the chat, and I will put this out for everyone before we move on. There will be an email sent after the session. This is my apologies for not stating this at the top of the session of the recording, and then you'll be able to find our content on any past webinars on our website under resources. So all of that will be there. And thank you, Becky, for thank you, Whitney, for putting that in the chat. Thank you so much. All right. So, Doug, to your point, and you mentioned this a moment ago, sometimes we're hearing in conversations, that there are more important things that we need to be talking about. Why is gender pronouns so important? And, people are too sensitive and they're making a big deal out of, what their name is, or, all of this stuff. What are you hearing in the rumbles that you're experiencing in your engagement with people?
Well, it was interesting because I just had a meeting with one of my clients just before this session, and I was talking to her about this webinar, And the one that she pointed out that she said that she hears all the time is, that's not how I was raised.
Mm.
And so if you look at how you know, it's really, it's maybe it's different than how you were raised, but it's where we can learn from each other and get to know each other. And so it's really interesting that people say that a lot, that, well, that's my opinion, or that's how I was raised. Well, why it's important to learn about another person's journey, as I said a few minutes ago. So that we hear a lot. The more important issues, if you think about that, the it's how can it be more important? It's not more important for that individual. Right. And that's really how I really like to, think about, again, how did they get to this point? And it's really important to them. It makes them feel safe. It makes them feel that they belong. So people are too sensitive. What do you think about that one, Ro? I mean, you probably hear that too as well. So
I hear it a lot, well, it's not a big deal. People are being too sensitive. They're not. They're not being sensitive. This is what individuals have decided for themselves. This is how they want to define. This is how they want to live life. There's nothing sensitive about that. This is their right to choose and make choices for themselves. I used to be of the mindset of, well, that's not how I was raised. I will be fully transparent with you all. I was brought up in a household where you had to put handles on people's names. I had to call people either Mr. or Mrs. or Sir or Ma'am, just because that was the way my mother raised us to give respect. However, in present day, if I call someone Mr. or Mrs. just based off of my presumption on how they visibly present, I could be causing offense and doing harm. So I can still give respect and acknowledge the person without having to put a title or a salutation on it in any way, shape, or form, and still be engaging. The sir, the ma'am, the Mr., the Mrs. does not necessarily qualify the respect. It's just something that I was taught. But just being open and transparent and being receptive, to me, is a different level of respect at this point where we are in society.
What about the last one, bro? I was just kidding.
Just kidding. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I think this is the one that is most problematic and is kind of the scapegoat. Like, oh, let me get out of it and say it was a joke. It's not funny. It's not a funny issue. Someone's pronouns are very important. The name they want to be called, trying to make assumptions is never a funny thing. It's very important that we make the connections and we get to learn each other. That I was just kidding is not a hall pass for getting over for constantly doing something. If you make a mistake, that's one thing. But if you constantly do it and it's intentional and you're doing it just to be spiteful, it's not funny. And labeling it as I was just kidding is not sufficient.
Right. And you hear there's a lot of controversy and tension around pronouns and how people are saying, well, they use all of these things. That's how I was raised, those type of things. And it's really about, I don't understand the controversy, I guess, is what you and I talk about this all the time, Ro. It's like, just respect what people want.
That's it.
And so it's really about, hey, they've taken the time to educate me, so I need to accept that learning and use it moving forward.
That's it. Well, I'm glad you said that, because there's a new EEOC regulation that was updated back in April of 2024 that now identifies gender identity and gender expression as in detailed recommendation. Right. So now if an employer repeatedly and intentionally misgenders an individual by using the name or pronouns inconsistent with the individual's known gender identity, or by denying, any employee access to bathrooms or any sex segregated facilities consistent with that individual's gender identity, is committing an unlawful workplace harassment. So this If you were unsure of the importance, just based on mutual respect for your fellow human being, here's some guidance around making sure that leaders and managers and everyone in your organization understands the impact that can happen for organizations if there's this repeated or intentional misgendering or misnaming of people. We want to make sure we're putting intentionality behind this to be inclusive and to make sure that we're operating in compliance with the EEOC, but also just in mutual respect of one human being to another. Doug, anything you want to add here?
Well, it's part of Title VII. So and Title VII was created in the 60s. And so, but it's been expanded since then. And it's really become a protected class under Title VII. So it's really important that you treat people with respect, and it's a legal issue as well. So that's all I would add. So.
Well, let's get into terminologies. I know
Okay.
a lot of things people are looking for, so I'm going to let you drive this section. I'll
All right.
offer what I can.
Okay, awesome. So let's look at the different terminologies. So we hear a lot of different things. So I'm going to give you a few examples, as well as the more common and some that you may have not seen before. Excuse me.
Okay.
The first one is he, him, his, is used for somebody who typically identifies as male. So that may have been they could have been male, assigned male at birth, or they could have determined that their gender as they progressed in their life. The second is she, her, and hers. It's used for somebody who identifies as female. And again, same, it could be what they were assigned at birth, or what they realized their gender was as they move through life. The typical one that we hear is they, them, and theirs. And that's a gender neutral option. And it's often used by people who are non-binary. So they don't really identify as either male or female. But they identify as they, them, or theirs. There's a couple other ones as well that you may see out there. And the first one is they, zir, and zirs. And that's another gender neutral option. So that's what the ones would start with Z. And then the other one is Z, them, and zirs. It's interesting because the X and the Z sound pretty similar, but again, it's yet another gender neutral choice. So these are the most commonly used pronouns. Somebody may have something else that they want to use. So it's, again, making sure that you understand that pronouns are ever evolving, and there are other variations that may come about in how we talk to people and how they identify themselves. I want to give you a quick example about pronouns that I just experienced yesterday. Is that cool with you, Ro? I just want to give that a quick example. Okay. So I'm working with another client, and I'm conducting interviews for them. And typically what's happening, and we're going to talk about, typically what's happening is that people will put their pronouns on their resumes. And so I had interviewed a person who identified as they and them. That was their pronouns. And what happened with in this situation was I was writing up my notes at the end of my interview with them, and I was using the wrong pronouns. I was using she or her, because the person seemed more a she or her to me, I guess, when I spoke with them. But then I had to go back and change all of my notes to reflect the pronouns that they wanted to use. So everybody's a work in progress. I mean, we teach this class, and so literally yesterday I was like going, I really have to watch my pronouns.
There are a couple of questions in the chat asking what the difference is between the gender neutral options. The distinct difference is the Z's, zers, and the zems, zirs are singular. They're singular options. There have been times where individuals say that they have a hard time using they, them, theirs because it sounds plural. So the Z, their, zers, it's not anything related to age or anything like that. It's just additional options that have a singular gender neutral option. I just wanted to respond to the question in the chat. Yeah.
Okay.
So the other terminology that we wanted to cover was the cisgender and transgender definition. So the definition of cisgender are individuals who identify with the gender assigned to them at birth based on their biological sex. So a person assigned female at birth who identifies as a woman is cisgendered. When we look at transgendered, it's trans means change. So trans are individuals who have a gender identity that is different or differs from the sex assigned at birth based on their biological sex. So a person assigned as male at birth who now identifies as a female is transgender. So that's the difference between identifying a cisgendered and a transgendered individual. Aligning with the biological sex assigned at birth and identifying that way as cisgendered, identifying as another sex not assigned in difference of what was assigned at birth is transgendered. Anything there you want to add, Doug? Or we're gonna...
No, I think, well, let's go into additional terminology then. So let's look at, so we talk about cisgender and transgender, but you've probably seen two acronyms that have been out there. So that's LGBTQIA+, or LGBTQ2S. And so I want to kind of define each of those letters for you, and we'll walk through them so you can understand what each of them mean. So first of all, L is for lesbian. That's referring to women who are attracted to other women. G is for gay, used for both men and women who are attracted to people of the same sex or the same or gender identity. B is bisexual, and that's for individuals attracted to two or more genders. So they may be attracted to male and female or other genders as well. T is transgender, that Romaine just talked about, pertaining to individuals whose gender identity differs from their assigned sex at birth. So they've gone through, they have gone through a tradition, or they're living their lives that way. That is considered transgendered. The Q is for queer or questioning, and that's an umbrella term for that's a hard word to say, heteronormative identities. So that's, oh, go ahead, Dro. So
heteronormative identities.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's a lot of word there. So, but what that means is it's really about people who identify outside the typical male or female gender roles. 2S is two-spirit, and 2S comes from, two-spirit comes from Native American, and that's typically a person who is considered to have different concepts of gender and spirituality. So they're considered to be of both in the 2S, two-spirit. The I is intersex, and that's typically that's typically a person who is born with both sex characteristics. So it could be genitalia, it could, they used to use the term hermaphrodite really for intersex. So that's really what intersex is. Asexual is for folks who typically do not experience sexual attraction. So that is included because that is a different way of looking at sexuality. And then finally, the last plus is that it includes other orientations and gender identities that are beyond the listing of the acronyms. And I'll give you a few examples. So there's non-binary, which we talked about earlier, and that's typically not considered male or female. Pansexual, which is gender blind, and means that it's similar to bisexual, but it's where they're just attracted to both sexes and people from other genders, as gender and sexuality. And then gender fluid is that shifts over time. So it's really where a person may start out and they're attracted to men, and then they slowly get attracted to women. So it's really about the situation. So that's kind of a lot of the things that you'll hear when it comes to the terminology with these acronyms.
So this is our gender-read person, and this was a graphic that we found on a website. It's pronounced metrosexual, and it shows the continuum of a person's identity. So it looks at gender identity, gender expressions, biological sex, sexual orientation, and commitment styles. And it shows the spectrum of, various ways that people can identify and live their lives. So we can look at gender identity and look at the spectrum of woman to man, and in the middle we have gender queer, and then we have gender expression, which can be feminine to masculine with androgynous in the middle. And then we look at, things like commitment styles. We go from people who casually, may date multiple people to having exclusive monogamous relationships. And in the center is this polyamorous, the poly commitment style, which is having exclusive relationships with multiple people. So when we look at this continuum, there's a lot of ways that a person's identity will show up when we look at gender expression, biological sex, and sexual orientation. So there's no, for lack of a better phrase, because this is a gender-bred person, there's no cookie cutter way to.
No, that's good.
Was that good?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
To consider a person's identity, there are too many dimensions of a person to kind of put them in a box. This is why it's important to really understand and connect with the individual.
Right. And then if you look at and on top of that, then you can layer other things as well. So if you really look at, people are on a spectrum in their sexuality as well as their gender, but also you can add on race and you can add on where they were grown up, where they grew up. You can add all of those things on top of it all. So it's really about understanding that person as an individual and where do they fall in these different spectrums.
Sure. So we want to look at gender privilege and allyship, because I think it's a very, very important concept. And I want us to really understand how we can look at gender privilege. I had this conversation yesterday with a client on site, and I said, if I walk into a female-only restroom, no one's going to question that. They're going to look at me and assume, okay, she's a female, she should be in the female restroom. However, when I think about the experience of transgendered individuals and what it's like for them to go into public restrooms, sometimes they are literally putting their safety on the line. If a non-binary person decides to go into a female or male restroom because there's no gender neutral restrooms at a public place or in an office place, think about the experience that they're having, the nervousness, the anxiety they may feel, that they may be, scorned or scoffed or accosted because someone is assuming something about them. Sure. We want to make sure that we're reflecting on our own experiences and even understanding where gender has afforded us opportunities. Have you been taken more seriously in a meeting because of your gender? Are you facing fewer stereotypes because of your gender? Sometimes we look at diversity and we focus sometimes on the race, but we really need to look at how gender plays a role in how we engage with one another and how our experiences kind of manifest how we treat people. So what I think is very important is, listening and learning, engage in conversations with people from diverse backgrounds, literally listen to their experience and perspectives. We can learn something from each other just based off of experience alone. And, it's okay that everybody's experience is not the same, and it's okay to respect that. I think that is very important. Doug's experience and my experience may be completely different. However, whenever we get together, we learn something from each other, and it really creates a more informed process on how we communicate. I've learned a lot from Doug in our times together over the last few years. But I'm rambling. I'm sorry. I get very passionate about this. Doug, anything that you want to add to this context?
Well, this is the thing is understanding, and a lot of times people think they hear privilege and they think that we're scolding them for having privilege, and it's not. It's just that in different situations everybody has a different experience and may have more privilege. So if you really look at that, But the key is to understand where that happens for you and how you can bring other people in. So, and it's really, and so that's what when we talk about, making that person feel comfortable when they're using a bathroom where they may appear to not be the person who's supposed to use that bathroom. It's really about how do we make them feel comfortable and challenge our own stereotypes. Because you may that person may walk into the restroom and you're thinking, what are they doing in here? Right. And that's when you have the opportunity to go, wait, I don't know the story.
Right.
And so I really need to think about why they may be in here. So it's really looking at how do I understand myself and how I relate to people that are different from me. True. And so, and I want to just tag on with Ro. I learn a ton from her all the time. I've probably stolen a whole bunch of things that she said today that I'm going to use when I do classes like this as well. So
it's sharing and borrowing,
Yeah,
so
I guess borrowing's good.
Borrowing is good.
Yeah.
So when we think about how we can, reflect on our experiences, and a lot of times I get asked questions by clients and leaders all the time, well, how do we do that? How do we, get past what we're visibly seeing to make connections? It all starts with conversation. It all starts with conversation. It's one of those things where if we can find a way to engage in conversations, we will learn a lot about each other. And it doesn't have to be oversharing or anything like that. But if you start a conversation with someone, I think my favorite is food. Food brings everybody together. Talking about your favorite foods or restaurants or memories from childhood, it really has a powerful way of creating community. And what happens is when we understand that a majority of our identity is invisible, and we don't get to know about individuals until we engage in conversation, this is a great way to start to build those conversations and make those connections. Asking about hobbies, vacation, travel. Doug and I talk about music all the time. I have been opened to so many fantastic artists just off of his recommendations, and places to travel, places to eat. And I know people don't like to talk about the weather, as we all pretty much almost melted last week here in the Philadelphia region. There is really an opportunity to spark conversation so that people feel comfortable and will share, and then you'll learn that there's a lot more similarities that we have than differences in the workplace.
Yeah, it's about finding the way that you connect. I mean, the person may be different than you. They may have a different gender. They may come from a different location in the country. They may have a different race, but it's really about what are the connections that bring us together. And I think sometimes we get caught up with those other things. We want to make sure that we're being, I'm being inclusive. Well, a great way to be inclusive is to ask people about stuff other than their characteristics. It's like, what do I like to do? What do I enjoy doing? So let's talk about, Ro, why don't we look at what happens when we make a mistake? Because guess what? I'm going to be honest with everybody. You're going to make a mistake. It's going to happen. And so just like I talked about yesterday, where I started to do my notes and I'm like, I am putting the total wrong gender in here. And so we're going to make mistakes, but I caught myself. So if you've misgendered a person, or I don't know if you understand what the term dead naming is. So for instance, if I'm a trans person, I may have changed my name. So, and I may have changed it to one that more matches the gender that I've transitioned to. And when we use the person's old pronouns or we use their old name, it's called dead naming. So it's really about accepting them for who they are at this point. So if we misgender a colleague or say something wrong, always acknowledge it, apologize, and then put forth an intentional effort to use desired names and pronouns going forward. So, and I really tell people, because and just keep it at that. Sometimes when we've offended people, we kind of go overboard, because most of us don't want to offend others. So don't make a big deal about it. Just make sure that your apology is sincere and that you make an effort to not do it. So not going, oh my God, I'm the worst person in the world or something like that. So it's really about that. So, and then on the other side, if I was misgendered, always come from a place where the person is assuming good intent, where the person is just made a mistake. And then respond and appreciate that and tell them your correct gender or your correct pronoun, and say, I appreciate your understanding and support. My pronouns are, and then thank you for your effort. Just a reminder, my pronouns are. There's just a ways to do it, to call them in instead of calling them out. So instead of getting upset and yelling, having some space for grace, I guess is the best way to put it. Don't you think, Ro?
I definitely think so. And I think for the employee who was misgendered, just really asserting themselves to kind of stand up and not folding in is very important. To speak up, to say, no, I just want to remind you, these are my pronouns. That shows that it is important to that individual, and this is their identity, and it should be respected. So we want to make sure that if someone offers us feedback, if we're the person who mistakenly misgender someone and we're giving the feedback, take that feedback as a gift, as a reminder, so that you can put that intentional effort going forward to using the correct name and pronouns for that individual. Now, I am a stickler for, communication in nonverbal form. I think we say a lot more non-verbally than we do verbally. So we also want to look at how we are responding with our gestures and our facial expressions and our tones of voice. The way you say something can totally negate the words you're saying if it doesn't come across with the right tone or sincerity. So, when we look at facial expressions and we look at gestures that we're making, are they sending mixed messages? If we're apologizing for misgendering someone, it's like, oh, I'm sorry. Does that feel sincere? It's like, oh, it's a matter of making sure we have full inclusion in not only what we say, but how we interact with one another. Word choice, tone of voice, body gestures, facial expressions, all of that goes into communication. So when we talk about inclusive communication, it's not just the words that we're putting on paper or the words that are coming out of our mouths or the words that are written in our policies or procedure or handbooks or anything like that. It's really the entire experience we're having with each other in terms of how we're engaging and approaching each other.
And I just want to add, this is a study I often use especially in customer service and leadership courses, is that it's from the 60s. It's a very old study. And what they came up with, out of 100%, typically 55% of your message is body language and gestures. 38% is your tone, and only 7% is the words that you use. So it's really important to understand that body language, as Rose said, body language and tone really communicate your true message typically. So it's important to look at that.
It is very important. Very important. So what are some of the best practices, for an inclusive workplace? Making sure organizations are really taking care of the whole employee, taking care of what we like to call the person-centered approach, making sure there are non-discrimination policies in place, making sure that those policies have clear guidelines on how to report acts of discrimination or harassment, and that the process is actually followed. I've worked with several clients that had things written in their handbook, and then when things arise, nobody knows what to do.
Yeah.
It baffles me sometimes, but it's making sure that those non-discrimination policies and processes are in place, that there is reporting structure, that education and training is offered to employees. Sensitivity awareness training is very, very important. We are a ever-evolving society. We are going to constantly change. There is always something that we need to learn and be mindful of when it comes to interacting with one another. The thing that I think is very important is visible representation. This is looking at how the LGBTQ2SIA+ community is represented in your organizations. Are they in leadership positions? Are they on your website? Are they part of your recruitment material? Is there representation of all of the individuals in your workforce presented in a way that someone coming in can see a reflection of themselves and maybe connect with someone like, okay, this really is an inclusive work environment. It makes a difference. Making sure that there are mental health resources available. There are a lot of mental health challenges that happen with the LGBTQIA2S plus community that we may not even be aware of, but making sure that there are provisions in the mental health resources and the benefit expansions for gender affirming care, for safe doctors, making sure that, you know, the dynamics for family coverage are inclusive of all the different types of family dynamics that may present in same-sex or heterosexual relationships, non-binary relationships, all of those things, and yet leveraging the inclusive language in all the communication that you send out across the organization. My absolute favorite right now is the gender affirming dress codes, because they should be gender neutral. People should be able to wear what they want to wear in the organization as long as it follows the standards. It should not be a gender specific dress code. You know, men should not have to wear pants. Women should not have to wear skirts. It should not be a differentiation between genders and what you wear to work. Uniforms are uniform, clothes are clothes. If I decide to come in, you know, a full suit, and nobody probably would question that, but if I decided to change my dress to be very masculine, it should not be a violation of the dress code policy. So when I think about that, I think about individuals that are going through transition and they are redefining who they are, and their dress may change, and that impacts people in the workplace. It really does. If you started working with an individual who identified as a male and they've now decided to change and identify as a female, that change can affect the workforce, because now it's like, well, how do I identify this person? What do I call them? What do I do? You find out their preferred name and pronouns, and you go with what they've defined themselves as. That old person no longer exists. It's now this person's new identity, and we should respect it accordingly. Doug, anything you want to add? I'm sorry, I felt like I rambled there.
Oh, no, I think you got it all, because I would like to jump to the next screen row and say, okay, so that's your organizational level. And I think, but if we really look at what can you do specifically, and so this has to start, this is where you can start. So, but it really starts with you doing some self-reflection. And it's where, what do I need to do to commit to inclusive communication? What are some of the things that I need to change in the way I communicate that is more inclusive with folks? Also being aware of our own biases. And that's really something that we can reflect on and say, okay, am I communicating differently to this person because they're of a different gender, or there's something that I don't understand? And taking the people-centric approach, which we've talked about from the very beginning, it's like, I'm looking at people as individuals, not as, you know, not as a box of people, or a type of a race or gender. And then finally asking for feedback. You know, it's once you get to know people, it's okay to ask them, am I, you know, how am I treating you? Or what can I do to include you more? So let's jump to the next screen, because I really want to talk about some of these specifically. So the things that you can do right now, these are things that you can do right now in the workplace. The first one is to include your pronouns in your introductions. Okay, you can do that. You can do that on email signature. You can do that on your Zoom. You can also say, I'm Doug May and I go by he, him, his. Ask colleagues how they would like to be introduced to others. It's typically, I think sometimes we try to tiptoe around things. Just ask, because people are more than willing to share. Initiate conversations with colleagues to learn more about them, and not just the characteristics you can see, but other things like we talked about, hobbies, and do you like to travel? What do you like to eat? And understand that some general norms may not be applicable anymore, like putting gender specific handles on people's names, Mr., Mrs., or referring to people as sir or ma'am. So those are some actions you can do right now.
And I just intentionally changed my Zoom name while we were live in session to show people how fast you can do that. All you have to do is kind of click on that
Oh, I do
more,
too.
and you want to, you click on more and you do rename, and you can just literally add your pronouns at the end. This creates a safe space for someone to feel comfortable sharing that information back with you. So if you're not openly in putting it in your introductions, but you put it on your Zoom link, that is a flag to say, okay, this is safe for me to share my pronouns back. And it really creates a space of reciprocity. So if I, come into a meeting, my name is Romaine, my pronouns are she, her, hers, that gives space for someone to kind of return that information if they're comfortable, versus me having to, say, well, Doug, I don't want to make an exception, but what are your pronouns? Like
Right.
it makes it uncomfortable. So if we offer it freely, it really creates that safe space for people to reciprocate. Key takeaways. Let's understand this is going to be a journey. With any journey, there are going to be missteps. We are going to make mistakes. Doug and I have identified places where we're still, and we teach this, that we're still making mistakes, but the key is to acknowledge, apologize, and move forward with intentionality. We want to always assume good intent and give space for grace. We're all on this journey together. So, including your pronouns in your introductions is a great way to just really become comfortable with utilizing pronouns and the importance, and then sharing your experiences. Be open with others about your experience and what you've learned about the impact of inclusive language and inclusive communication. Now, the big thing for me is paying attention to the everyday language, and being conscious of how bias may, unintentionally affect what we do and don't communicate. I am born and raised in Philadelphia. So when I leave meetings or places, I am prone to say, all right, guys, have a great day. I did not realize how much of an impact guys has on individuals who may not identify as males. And someone called me in and flagged that for me. So I now make sure I conclude my meetings with thank you, everybody, or everybody have a great day. Have a wonderful day, folks. Something like that. But I try to steer clear of gender specific colloquialisms because they can definitely have impact on people. Doug?
All right. And I always end any DEIB session that just it's really about taking the time to understand other people and really allowing them to be who they are. And so, and then embracing that. So I think if we really look at all of these key takeaways, it's really about realizing most people come from a good place and that we need to have space for grace. So I think we have some questions. Ro, so do you want me to read the first one and we can talk about it?
Sure, we still have a couple minutes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So what action, if any, is appropriate when an employee refuses to participate in sharing pronouns? Example, at meetings, we introduce ourselves with our pronouns, but employee X typically does not say them. So what do you think about that one? Let's talk a little bit about that one.
Think, and do me a favor, repeat the question again for me. My dog was having a tantrum. So
Okay. What action, if any, is appropriate when an employee refuses to participate in sharing of pronouns? So the example would be that they're introducing themselves in a meeting and using their pronouns, and this person will not say it. Well, the employee X routinely does not say them.
I think it's important that we don't force people to do it, but we create the space that if they want to share the information, they can.
I would agree with that. That would be how I would answer as well.
Are there any other questions in the Q&A that? Oh, there's one here. Is it acceptable to use gender neutral pronouns even though I may identify as a particular gender? Yes, that is absolutely your choice in how you want to be defined. That is definitely an answer, a choice that you can make, and using gender neutral pronouns is that individual's choice. I feel like did I miss any?
Did we miss any other ones? Let me just look.
If there are additional questions that we did not get to today, because we want to be respectful of your time and we're very much nearing the 12 o'clock mark, our email addresses are listed up in the corner. You can contact us at rjoneswise@exudehc.com or dmay@exudehc.com. We will make sure any additional questions that come through, we will respond to them. And we encourage you, to watch the playback and share. Oh, there's a question that just came in the chat. I work at a school.
Right.
Is that the one?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't see that chat. I was in the Q&A. So we will respond to questions that you all send to us. Doug, it has been an absolute pleasure hanging out with you this morning, having this conversation. Thank you to all of our participants who joined us this morning. Thank you for taking time out of your day. The playback will be sent out. The links will be available, and we look forward to connecting with you all soon and very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I really appreciate everybody attending. It was great to have you.
Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you.